Welcome to Lethal Dose, your favorite toxicology-focused podcast where we delve into true crime cases involving drugs and poisons. My name is Venus Dineko. I'm a layperson fascinated by true crime.
My name is Kayla Woods. I'm an author and toxicologist.
Let's get started. We have a content warning for child death in this episode.
So this is a story that lands close to home in a lot of ways. This is a Colorado story that takes place in a lot of places that I have at least personally been, so that'll be interesting.
Yeah, interesting.
Neighbors in the Meadowood area of Aurora, Colorado came home from working and picking up their children at school around 5 p.m. on August 8th, 2002, to hear a woman screaming. 28-year-old Faye Henderson was on her knees in her driveway yelling things like, "They're dead, they're cold," and asking for help while another woman tried to console her. Inside the home, Faye's two children, 5-year-old Killian and 4-year-old Rhapsody, were dead in their bedrooms. Earlier that morning around 8 a.m., the children told their father they weren't feeling well. 29-year-old Raffi Henderson worked as a taxi driver at night and took care of his children during the day while his wife went to school. He told investigators he napped with the children after they told him they felt sick. Then they woke up for lunch around noon and ate peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and watched TV. The children still felt ill, so they went back to sleep after that. When Faye arrived home around 2 and Raffi headed off for work, he told her the children were still sleeping. Faye let them sleep, but then Faye's sister and a cousin, so Faye's sister's child, came over later in the afternoon. The cousin checked on Killian and Rhapsody around 5 and found them cold and unresponsive. Foam had formed on the mouths of both kids, and Rhapsody had vomited. Emergency responders to the scene included the fire department and a crew from Excel Energy to test the home for carbon monoxide and natural gas. There were no signs of trauma to either child, and so a poison was immediately expected. But the lack of an environmental toxin pushed investigators to believe the deaths were likely due to foul play. Raffi was in the Navy and was honorably discharged in 1994. Faye and Raffi married in 1996, and neither had an arrest history. Robert Killian Henderson was born to them in 1997, and his sister Rhapsody Dawn arrived in 1998. The family moved to the home in Aurora, Colorado from California in 2000 because Raffi was offered a job in telecommunications. However, that appeared to have fallen through as he was now driving a taxi. A warrant was obtained to search the home, and both parents complied with the investigation, as did the rest of the family, answering questions and even allowing their cars to be searched. The home was cordoned off, and prescription and over-the-counter medications were taken from the home to assist in the toxicology screen, which was received the same day the children were interned. And the result...
What does interned mean?
Buried.
Oh, okay.
The results of the report were not made public so as to not influence the police investigation, and all of the documents were sealed. However, information quickly leaked that the authorities suspected the children both died from a possible overdose on a cough syrup containing dextromethorphan.
So why was the tox report not made? Is that normal?
I think in a lot of cases, especially with children, it's not made public, and especially in cases
or it's not made public, but it's given to the authorities.
So they'll give it to the authorities, but especially in like a murder case, they usually tend to try to keep as many details under wraps as possible.
Gotcha.
Dextromethorphan is a decongestant found in many cough syrups, including both Vicks NyQuil and Children's NyQuil. However, the instructions on the bottle, on most bottles that is, indicate that a pediatrician should be consulted before administering the medicine to children under 6. So this was the last that the public heard of the case for about 6 months. All of it was being reported in the Rocky Mountain News, and I found most of my research information in the archives for that newspaper. And so the next thing that the Rocky Mountain News reported on was in February of 2003, when Arapahoe County prosecutors issued a warrant for the arrest of Raffi Henderson for administering fatal doses of cherry-flavored Smart Choice nighttime cold medicine to both children. The Hendersons had gotten a lawyer, which totally smart, and had
Mhm.
moved out of the family home at this point. I mean, it had been cordoned off. It was a crime scene. They said that they never wanted to go back, and I totally get that. Their
I
kids died there.
1000% get that. Yeah.
Right.
Like,
So Raffi was staying with family in Kansas. I think Faye may have also been with him, but that's where he was when the warrant was issued. And it was reported to the Rocky Mountain News that he intended to turn himself in and face the 2 counts of child abuse resulting in death, along with 2 counts of second-degree assault, and a possible 5th count if convicted of a violent crime. However, Raffi denied giving the children any medication on the day of their deaths. He insisted that he checked their temperatures when they first told him they felt ill around 8, and found that neither of them had a fever. Raffi claimed he was hesitant to give the kids anything because Faye had made him paranoid that he would give them the wrong amount, so instead, he said he gave them some frozen treats and had them rest and watch TV. According to an affidavit, though, Raffi had admitted to police that he had actually given the kids something, but was originally nervous to tell them that in case it looked suspicious. He said he filled a small metal cup, like the kind used for like dipping sauces that can hold around 2.5 ounces.
like a ramekin?
A little ramekin, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So he filled that halfway with cough syrup and gave one of these to Killian and one of these to Rhapsody.
Okay.
But then he later recanted his statement and said it was coerced.
Did he say who he was coerced by?
I assume it was just one of those things where he's in the interrogation room and
and it was just, there was a lot of pressure and a lot going on.
Yeah, exactly. So for this specific cold medicine, which I couldn't find anywhere on the internet, I couldn't find any indication that it ever existed aside from this case. Apparently, the instructions on the bottle warned against administration to children younger than 12 without a pediatrician's approval. And that's pretty reasonable. That's something that was seen a lot at that time, I think.
And these kids were just like 4 and 5, right?
Yeah, they were quite young. Yeah. There were discrepancies concerning exactly how much cough syrup the children ingested, despite Raffi admitting he gave them only a little bit. Arapahoe County, where the Meadowood neighborhood is, they sent their toxicology samples to the El Paso County Coroner's Office. There, they were analyzed by Chief Forensic Toxicologist Joseph Levinsky. And Levinsky told the authorities that the children ingested a large amount of syrup because he found it in their blood, urine, and stomach lining. But a different toxicologist named Jim Ruth at the University of Colorado was also contacted by the police with autopsy information, and he believed that each child only consumed a little over half an ounce. Furthermore, only 1 bottle of Smart Choice was found in the entire house, which was in a basket out of the reach of the children, and it was missing less than a full ounce of medicine. Complicating toxicology data even further was the fact that Rhapsody had vomited, and I am not sure if that vomit was retained and tested. Now, the family, including Faye, who continued to support Raffi, maintained that it would have taken several bottles of cough syrup to kill the children, and perhaps they had gotten into the medication on their own. And this doesn't appear to have been suggested in the affidavit, but the affidavit did say that Killian's body appeared to have been moved after his death, so a lot of things aren't quite lining up. And I'd say it's kind of tricky to say how much would be needed to kill the children, because I don't know really anything about the complete contents or concentrations of Smart Choice cold medicine, because I couldn't find anything anywhere. Like, usually when I'm looking at these old cases, I can even find something on eBay or something where somebody is selling a box for vintage purposes. I couldn't find anything like that, so I honestly don't know how much was in this cold medicine. I do know that toxicity has been recorded in children given 10 milligrams per kilogram of dextromethorphan on its own, and seizures have been noted in the 20 to 30 milligram per kilogram range. That's not a whole lot at all.
Right.
But things become far more dangerous when dextromethorphan is administered in combination with other drugs. And the coroner declared that the deaths were homicides resulting from acute intoxication due to the combined effects of dextromethorphan, pseudoephedrine, acetaminophen, and doxylamine, and he was emphatic that the family's suggestion that the children died from a bacterial or viral infection was absolutely just not possible. It was the combined effects of these drugs. So I would say, even not knowing the concentrations, it probably would not take multiple bottles to kill these children. They were very small children, and this is a lot of drug-drugs interactions, right?
Right.
And it would appear that not only did they not die from any sort of infection, but they didn't even have colds or coughs on the morning of their deaths, as Raffi had claimed.
What?
Yeah, so what's going on here?
Yeah.
So there was information at this time that suggested that dextromethorphan was not only ineffective for the treatment of pediatric colds, but was actually dangerous to children. And there was not much clinical data because of the ethical implications of testing on children, which I totally get.
Sure.
But so that meant that most of the toxicity data at the time could only be highly incorrectly extrapolated from adult data because children are not just small adults.
Right. Right. Things process differently, their metabolisms are, like, there are way too many variables.
Way too many different variables.
Right.
Yeah. So this was known at the time. But it was also known at the time, and argued by the coroner, that if children given in excess of any of these medicines receive medical attention soon enough, they can be supported until the drugs are metabolized. This can even be done at home in some cases, and doesn't necessarily require hospitalization. But the point is that the drugs, even in combination, don't typically act quickly enough to induce a quick death. And this became a very damning point in the prosecution's argument at a preliminary hearing in April of 2003, because Raffi could have done something to help the children, but apparently he was also sleeping. And so that's where it comes in, why are they given something that makes them sleep? You were sleeping, like, why was the cold medicine ever actually given to the children? Which it clearly was. It's in both their systems.
Right.
So, about dextromethorphan, it's a synthetic codeine analog that was originally designed as a morphine alternative. But it doesn't act on the mu-opioid receptor, so it doesn't actually act like an opioid. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And its mechanism of action for cough suppression is actually unknown. It works in adults, it's known to work in adults, but we don't know why. And we know that it can cause sedative effects like drowsiness and dizziness in adults. But like you and I were just saying, children metabolize drugs way differently from adults because of their growing bodies, the disease state that they might be in, and like the difference between even a 18 and a 19-year-old is a lot less than the difference between a 4 and a 5-year-old developmentally, right?
Sure.
And so they are far more likely to experience adverse effects from dextromethorphan, like irritability, restlessness, hallucinations, hypertension, and dystonia, which is loss of muscle tone. They can also experience lethargy, but it is noteworthy that most of these symptoms are the same as in a stimulant drug. And that's because drugs and cold medicines, including dextromethorphan, that tend to be depressants in adults are actually stimulating in children.
Oh, interesting.
And so now it seems to be, if Raffi wanted to sleep and wanted the children to sleep and gave them something to go to sleep and then they were stimulated, did that change the situation? If that's indeed what happened, which we don't know. Symptoms of stimulation can occur in adults experiencing dextromethorphan toxicity, and these are typically an indication that that person is experiencing serotonin syndrome, because dextromethorphan is a known serotonin uptake inhibitor. So people on SSRIs or MAOIs need to be especially cognizant of that if they experience agitation, confusion, tachycardia, or high fever, because that means that you're also very easily susceptible to seizures, irregular heartbeat, and falling into unconsciousness. Which, I didn't know any of that. No one ever told me any of that.
No.
And I've been on a couple SSRIs recently.
Yeah.
For children, the effects of dextromethorphan can be made more intense when combined with other drugs, like acetaminophen or pseudoephedrine, both of which were found in the Henderson Children's systems. Pseudoephedrine is a sympathomimetic that reduces nasal congestion by acting on vascular smooth muscles, but it is also a central nervous system stimulant that can produce agitation, restlessness, insomnia, psychosis, and seizures. It is generally considered safe for children older than 6 at levels that don't exceed 120 milligrams, and toxicity is induced at levels above 180, but you're still getting these stimulant properties in a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not a good combo.
Right. So that seems to be where the prosecution's theory was that the children, they weren't in school because Faye wanted to homeschool them so that they could grow up together and not be divided by a grade, right? And so Raffi was having to take care of them while Faye was at school, and he was trying to get sleep so that he could do a night shift of cab driving. He maybe gave them the cold medicine trying to put them to sleep, but it made them more energetic, and so maybe he gave them even more and pushed them into a fatal dose. But again, there was only one bottle of the cold medicine found on the property. So, on the other hand, it's possible that he gave them a single dose, like he admitted and then recanted. But then he didn't check on them like he should have, and they succumbed to lethargy and coma from the combined toxic effects of drugs, which were clearly indicated on the bottle, not being meant for children under 12 years old.
Right, like just still such a small dose could have been...
Yeah, because they were so young. And I don't know, as I was doing the research for this, it just kind of kept making me think about our ketamine episode where we're trying to chemically sedate people that we find difficult. And it just seems like maybe there's an argument to be made that chemical sedation is never appropriate. You know?
I mean...
And, you know, I've never been the parent of a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old, admittedly, but it just seems like making cold medicine your babysitter isn't like a responsible thing.
No, not only is it not responsible, but it's like malicious almost.
Yeah.
Like,
oh yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
To do it and then also to not check on them. Like I think anytime
right.
you give a child a substance, you should check on them to make sure that that isn't doing anything to impact them. I don't know. I suppose I'm speaking from a different place, but I also think that it's not unreasonable to make such an assertion.
No, you should check on your kid. Like, well, and even if, like, you didn't give them anything, they're sick. Like, check on your fucking kid.
Right, if they were sick and you're not
well, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So as Henderson's preliminary proceedings progressed, he remained jailed with a $250,000 bond, and the credibility of the people accusing him of poisoning his children then came into question. Joseph Levitsky retired in February of 2004 while this case was still active. But in March of 2004, an attorney on the case claimed that Levitsky intentionally withheld information about Killian and Rhapsody's toxicology that showed they actually had lower levels of the drugs in their systems than he testified in the preliminary hearings. She also claimed that Levitsky used up pretty much all of the autopsy samples, making it impossible to retest them. Yeah, that's a no-no. And some of these tests were conducted without prosecutors' knowledge even after Levitsky had already agreed to turn all the evidence over to the defense. Even worse, tissue samples from the kids' hearts, kidneys, and livers were missing or had been destroyed.
What the fuck is that about?
I mean, I guess I don't feel like I'm in a position where I have to defend the coroner's office anymore because I don't work for them anymore.
No.
But also I would like, they do serve several counties in Colorado, like almost all of the counties in Colorado. And so if anybody in Colorado is listening, I would like to say this was in 2004 and they've made steps into the 21st century since then.
Okay.
So it could still happen. There could still be people who do things incorrectly and stuff. But
sure.
The way that they...
But it's harder.
Yes, because they have better chains of custody now. And it's more medico-legal than fuck around and find out, right?
Okay.
So hopefully that allays anybody's concerns. But in 2004, this happened and it was bad. And the El Paso County coroner, not the Arapahoe coroner, but our coroner, he denied that any tests any secret testing had been conducted, as the defense was claiming, and he explained that the tests done by Levitsky later on would only have been done to confirm previous test values, which again is something that is done. But not everyone believed him when he said that, and the credibility of all in-house testing done for medical legal purposes at El Paso County were called into question by some legal analysts, which was a huge fucking deal.
That sounds like a huge deal.
Yeah, because they served several counties in Colorado and, did toxicology for, at least 1,000 cases every year. So not good. And, I don't blame them for calling it into question. I mean, there was recently, this is an ongoing story, but there was recently a Colorado Bureau of Investigation analyst who I think that all of her samples are being called into question now because they found a handful that, yeah. So I know I just said hey, this isn't really an issue anymore. There's different issues now, and maybe that doesn't make anybody feel better, but
right.
So in April of 2004, it was revealed that Levitsky had been unaware that the Arapahoe County coroner had sent him different tissue samples, and he thought that all of the samples had just been liver. So he combined the liver, heart, kidney, and muscle tissues into a single extraction. And that's not good. That is not good. The coroner, the Arapahoe County coroner, placed the blame on himself for not more clearly labeling the samples, which, yes, you're also at fault, but spreading the blame around, the end result was still the same, right?
Right. It still got fucked up.
Yeah. But he did emphasize that the tissue testing was performed after blood tests and had little impact on his opinion that the children were killed by an overdose of cough syrup. So they were just meant to be supplementary. And so even if you were to disregard those, he's saying the blood work is
still there.
Yeah.
It's still damning.
But the defense wanted to totally have the case dismissed, and they accused Levitsky of attempting to intentionally destroy evidence.
I mean, I don't know if I'd go that far.
But if you were
the defense, sure. If I'm the defense, sure. But come on.
Yeah. So the charges against Henderson weren't dropped, but the judge on the case allowed blood samples to be submitted to a different lab at the University of Colorado a mere 18 days before the trial was set to begin. So we're going to get these tests going, and we're going to go into the trial with this fresh evidence, and hopefully you can make heads or tails of it, right? And in some cases, more tissue samples may be taken from embalmed bodies. Sometimes that is the case, and it's not great because you usually have to take... There was at least one case I was a participant in the testing for where they exhumed the body and then they had to take muscle tissue from the ass of the person because it was the furthest away from any veins that would have carried the embalming fluid. And so it would have been less impacted. But because it's also further away from veins...
It's not great for testing.
Exactly. Yeah. So sometimes that happens. But the Hendersons had their children cremated, and they had declined the opportunity for a private autopsy and toxicology testing to happen before cremation, and so there was no way of getting any additional tissue or blood samples.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So the remaining samples of blood had been sent to the National Medical Services in Philadelphia, which is still, as far as I know, and was common practice in 2004, where El Paso County would send samples that they are unable to test for in-house. So none of that is super weird. But that meant that the samples had to be sent back to El Paso County or Arapahoe County from Philadelphia and then get tested within the 18 days before the trial.
That's a lot for 2004.
Yeah, I'm sure people were shitting their pants over this. In fact, I know they were. Levitsky pretty much lost his mind after this. This destroyed the man, and he had retired.
Right, he was already retired, but he hadn't lost his mind.
Yeah. And to make matters even worse, Levitsky was supposed to respond to these allegations in court, not during the trial, but ahead of it, but ended up being hospitalized with pancreatitis and pneumonia.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So he couldn't speak for himself, but a lot of other people weighed in on this whole thing, including an instrumentation expert in Fort Collins who I'd never heard of, but he has a point. He said that Levitsky's data lacked important requirements for instrumental testing, including proof that standards were used and the instruments were running as expected to properly quantify samples, which is like analytical chemistry 101.
Got to make sure your instruments work.
You got to make sure they work, and you got to make sure that they are reading as they're supposed
they're accurate.
to. Yeah. And so you would inject a standard where you're like, it has 50 milligrams of dextromethorphan, and then you see the spike and you say, yep, that calculates to 50. So I know whatever I inject from this kid's blood, whatever number I get from the same calculation is a number I can rely on. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And he did not have those when he did these tests.
Oh.
Yes, in a murder case. So
did they just get that thrown out?
Testing was redone eventually. There was enough blood for the testing to be redone. But when the testing was redone, the results varied pretty significantly.
Oh.
Yeah. So they got the results back from NMS in Philadelphia, and they found higher concentrations of pseudoephedrine in the blood of the children than Levitsky found. Significantly high. 78% higher in Killian's blood and 21% higher in Rhapsody's. But the levels of dextromethorphan in both kids was lower than Levitsky found. It was 63% lower in Killian.
Oh, shit.
And 23% lower in Rhapsody. So it's just wildly varying, right?
Yeah.
And like, no retested value is going to come out exactly the same as the first.
No, but wildly different like that? Like,
exactly.
That's crazy.
Yeah, like anything
like, what's the margin? Like, what's the margin usually? Like, a couple of percent or a few percent?
5 to 10, depending.
Okay.
Like, even 10 is a little high, right?
Okay.
So, like, 23.78, that is...
Right, is a little ridiculous.
Yeah, that's enough to be like, And you didn't inject standards when you did yours either?
Right.
Yeah. With the values varying so widely and no samples remaining to conduct further tests on, the defense again demanded that the case be thrown out. But the deputy district attorneys determined that what remained of the children's blood samples was sufficient for retesting by the prosecution, and so the plan to have it tested by yet another lab ahead of the trial remained in place.
Okay.
Not that the levels as they stood mattered much to the argument for the defense, because they argued that the concentrations found by both Levitsky and NMS were within therapeutic levels. But I have to wonder if those levels were for adults, or if the levels were being considered by their experts individually and not with regard to drug-drug interactions in children.
Right.
They had another toxicologist on their side, author Michael Bodden, who said the coroner's determinations were, quote, a diagnosis in itself so unique and unusual in the experience of physicians and in the medical literature as to raise immediate concerns as to its validity. And he argued that the children's cause of death should have been declared undetermined. But I think this guy is completely full of shit.
Okay.
If I'm being honest. First of all, he's not a medical examiner. As far as I know, his credentials are that he's a toxicologist. So I don't know why
he's different.
It is different, and unless he actually has experience as a physician, he should not be speaking on the experience of physicians.
Because the medical examiner takes information from the autopsy from the toxicologist. They make the final call, not the toxicologist. Yeah, the toxicologist is just there to do the tox.
Right, and they can help with the interpretations of biochemical stuff and drugs, but ultimately it's the medical examiner looking at the whole picture.
Gotcha.
And it's not unique and unusual because there were actually quite a few pediatric deaths from cold medicine in the early 2000s. Like, it was kind of an issue, and I'll talk about it later, but it was not at all unusual.
Okay.
And if I can make one more point on this guy before moving on.
Of course.
To say that this case should have been declared undetermined, like, of course, he's arguing for the defense, right? And so he's trying to look at things as they would want them to be argued for. But at least nowadays, medical examiners are only allowed to call so many cases per year undetermined. And if they have too many undetermined cases, then they have to go back and they have to reconsider. And it was common, at least at El Paso County, a handful of years ago, to have sit-down meetings with everyone, the toxicologists, the medical examiners, and say, I'm not really sure about this. I want to call it undetermined, but could it maybe be an accident or something like that?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's part of the whole, like, just keeping them honest so that they don't call everything undetermined. But
Right.
yeah. So I really think it would be inappropriate to have called this case undetermined. Like, maybe accident, but not undetermined. So Levitsky finally took the stand to answer for his actions ahead of the Henderson's trial at the beginning of May 2004. He was accused by the defense of outrageous government conduct and deliberately using up most of the blood and all of the tissue samples to hamper defense expert witnesses. Levitsky said that he was confused while he was on the stand and answering questions because he was still on medications from his recent illness. But he did admit he'd been working in retirement mode when he was doing the testing for the Henderson case. Yeah, not looking great.
Not looking good.
He denied reanalyzing any blood in March of 2004, which would have been a month after he retired, although he said he was in the office that day and didn't remember if he did anything else.
Okay.
Yeah, like, it's not looking good. You have this, like, old man who's retired and just got over pneumonia, like...
Yeah, yeah, it's not a good vibe.
No, like, I get that you need to question him, but it's also like, who is winning from this?
Right, like, you're punching down here.
He did admit to accidentally throwing out some of the blood samples and all the remaining tissue samples of the children, which, like... Maybe that would happen today, but again, there's chain of custody, and they mark homicides in a very specific way to prevent this from happening so that a decade down the line or 20 years down the line, they'll still have something to pull from.
Okay.
So, despite all of this punching down and horrible answering of questions, the case proceeded as planned, and Levitsky's results were not thrown out. Henderson changed his plea in May and admitted to his guilt for the negligent homicide and assault of his children.
Oh.
On August 10th, 2004, 30-year-old Robert Raffi Henderson was sentenced to 6 years in prison for the deaths of his children, which was the maximum allowed under the deal made with prosecutors and spared him a 60-year prison sentence. Faye Leffler was at this point estranged from her husband and living in Georgia. She did not attend the hearing, but wrote a statement for the court, which read,
"If it was an accident, I would have found a way to forgive him, but his actions show what he did was selfish and without consideration to me or his children. I will never have closure until the day I die and hold them again. Do what you will with Raffi, and I will have faith that in the end God will be his judge."
Several people wrote to the court asking for leniency because they did not believe that Raffi intended to kill his children in 2002. And it's very likely that he wanted them to just go to sleep and let them sleep, and I argue that that is still child abuse, but it is possible he didn't mean to kill his kids. Like, I
Sure.
can see that.
I mean, yeah, I can buy into that too, but it is still negligent. It is still,
Yeah. And while I don't have a ton of sympathy in the end for somebody who did kill their children by chemically sedating them, I think that his life fell apart after that. And the reason I think that is because Henderson was arrested on April 11th, 2008, while on parole for the murders, following a high-speed chase that ended when his car broke down on the Cherry Creek Dam Road after he robbed the TFC Bank in Highlands Ranch, Colorado.
Oh, holy shit.
Yeah. The FBI accused Henderson of 4 total bank robberies in the Denver metro area, dating back to December 2007, before he earned parole and while in community corrections for the murders. They said he used several disguises during the robberies, including wigs, hats, glasses and sunglasses, masks, costume makeup to make himself look burnt, specifically for some reason. Rubber noses, and a President Nixon mask. Some of these were supplied to Henderson or even applied to him by his new girlfriend, whose car he used as a getaway vehicle for some of the robberies. The couple managed to steal a little over $9,000 total in the 4 robberies, and apparently
That's it.
That's it. Yeah, not even.
You can't even, like, you can get, like, a used car for that, like, a decent used car, but, like, okay.
Like I'm saying, he's not doing well after this
Yeah.
whole thing.
Yeah.
And apparently they were unsuccessful in one of the robberies because the girlfriend handed a demand note to an employee at the bank who was not a teller, and they read the note and said, "Is this a joke?" And so she left.
Ugh.
$0 that day.
Yeah.
Henderson likely had to serve the rest of his time for the murders as well as time in federal prison for the robberies, but apparently the internet didn't really exist before 2012, and so that's all the information I have.
Mm.
Killian and Rhapsody Henderson were not the only children in the early 2000s to die from accidental overdose on cough medicine, as I said before. They were just two of a handful who were found to have been murdered with it. In 2007, academic pediatricians and health administrators petitioned the FDA to have drug companies voluntarily withdraw all cold medicines for children under 4 years old because of the potential for risk. Instead, these medications were simply relabeled to indicate they were not meant for children under 4. Mm-hmm.
I mean, but the other medication, I mean, it was basically that.
Right. And so further independent research was conducted in 2009 to examine the reasons behind improper administration of cold medicine. And what they found was that the average caregiver, so average in terms of age, average in terms of like education and literacy and all of that, the average caregiver for a child under 2 would not properly interpret product labels if they referenced them at all beyond reading the word infant on the bottle or seeing babies and teddy bears on the bottle, which makes them think this is probably something I can give to an infant.
Right.
A mere 47% of caregivers actually read and followed dosing instructions.
Oh, well, that's not good.
Yeah, especially when all they're doing, they're like, it's not a problem. This isn't a regulatory problem. We'll just fix the labeling. And it's like, the labeling is not the issue here. Like,
yeah.
The real kicker here is that cold medicines generally don't even seem to work for children. There are a number of studies that have been conducted regarding efficacy in dextromethorphan-based medicines, which, as we said, are especially toxic to children, and they found that they don't work any better than a placebo does.
Ugh.
So basically,
Wow.
if mommy gives me a teaspoon of water, or she gives me a teaspoon of NyQuil, I'm going to think...
have the same effect.
Yeah, because mom's God, and mom's going to make me feel better. Like,
right.
Yeah.
Wow.
Pseudoephedrine, acetaminophen, and doxylamine may be safe on their own for specific symptoms in children, but they're not meant for children under 4 in any case, and they can still be dangerous to children 6 to 11 based on their size and disease state, so a doctor should always be consulted first. And it can be really difficult to navigate all of this on your own because I couldn't even find... I mean, I rely on drug-drug interaction checkers a lot just to, like... I did my due diligence for myself, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's none that exist for children that I could find, even on pediatric hospital websites.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, that seems like a pretty important resource to have.
Yeah. And even the ones on these websites, when I typed in these 4 ingredients, they didn't even give basic information like saying that dextromethorphan is contraindicated for children under 12. There wasn't even a little pop-up that said that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the recommended treatment for children is honey and lemon. But obviously this is going to be frustrating for people with infants under 1 because they can't have honey due to the risk of infant botulism.
Yeah.
Yeah. Episode 1, baby!
Yeah, bringing it all back.
So acetaminophen on its own can be used to treat fever. As Patreon listeners may recall, that Tylenol was originally marketed to children because it is so mild. So acetaminophen is kind of like for children. However, this still needs to be administered according to the labeling instructions and is still not recommended, like I said, for children under 6 or under 4. Most importantly, it's said by the FDA that children just need to stay hydrated when they're sick, and if they're having trouble with sneezing and coughing that keeps them or you awake, they recommend a cool mist humidifier, and that's the most you can do until they're 12, you know? So it sucks.
Just
it really
make them
sucks.
comfortable. Yeah, that sucks. That sucks, especially because kids get sick so often.
They do, yeah. But it's kind of like you just have to be a mom, be a dad, be a parent, be a genderless parent, and just assure them that they're going to be okay. Because they will. They'll get over a cold.
They'll be fine. They will survive it much more reliably than if you give them a medication that could possibly kill them.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. Because that's more dangerous than what they're going through at the time.
Yep.
Well, any final thoughts on this one before we wrap it up?
Man, read the fucking labels. Read the box before you put something in your body or your children's body. That blew my mind.
Yeah.
That blew my mind.
And if anybody out there who's listening has any, authority to make a drug-drug interaction checker for kids, at least have it say this isn't recommended for a certain age, right?
Right.
Do that for me.
Get to it, world.
Yeah. And stay safe out there with cold season. It's already here. It's here. So stay safe.
Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please like, follow, subscribe, and review us everywhere you get your podcasts.
For more Lethal Dose content, you can find us at Lethal Dose Pod on Instagram, Tumblr, and TikTok.
For an overdose of content, subscribe on Patreon for exclusive episodes and much more.
The show theme is Look Far by our dear wizard friend Fogweaver. More of their music can be found on bandcamp.com.
Lethal Dose is created, researched, produced, and edited by Kayla Woods and Venus Daneko. Stay safe, and remember,
the dose makes the poison.